Welcome to our Courage to Heal podcast. This podcast is created to encourage one another to live our fullest life by embracing, accepting, and loving ourselves unconditionally. We already have it within us to change our lives and live our dreams, no matter the circumstances. Today, we are honored to hear a story that reminds us exactly what that courage can look like. My guest today is Kenneth Kunken, author of I Dream of Things That Never Were. Ken, I'm grateful you're here. Before we explore the deeper layers of your journey, I would really love listeners to hear your story in your own words.
Okay, well, I think the best place to start would be when I was 20 years old. Let me bring your audience back to October 31st, 1970. At that time, I was a fairly typical 20-year-old college student at Cornell University. I worked hard in school. I was studying industrial engineering, and I loved sports. I was a member of the lightweight football team at Cornell. And like many 20-year-olds, I dreamt of leading a useful, productive, rewarding, and happy life. But on October 31st, 1970, I was playing in a college football game against Columbia University. I ran down the field on a kickoff, and when I tackled the ball carrier, I broke my neck and severely damaged my spinal cord. As a result, I'm a quadriplegic. I'm almost totally paralyzed below the shoulders. I then spent the next 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers.
What was the first conversation you had with yourself when the reality of what happened really sinked in?
Boy, it took years before it really sunk in. I still couldn't believe that this happened to me and that this was a permanent injury. They kept saying it's a permanent injury. I couldn't conceive of this injury being permanent. When I was injured in 1970, I didn't know of anybody else who had an injury similar to mine. You didn't hear much or see much about somebody with a spinal cord injury, particularly somebody who had an injury in the neck where you couldn't move your arms as well as your legs. There weren't any role models that I could look to at that time for hope or inspiration. And in the rehab facility, I had a number of roommates, all of whom had spinal cord injuries, but they were hurt lower down in the neck than I was. So they had more movement than I had. They were also hurt longer than I was, and they didn't seem to be doing anything productive with their lives. I found it extremely discouraging and depressing. The rehab facility, which seemed to offer very little hope or encouragement that I would be able to live a happy life after this.
During those long months in the hospital or the rehab centers, what was the hardest part emotionally?
Well, the hardest part emotionally was feeling, for one, that there was absolutely nothing that I could do for myself. And I needed to be dependent on everybody else for every one of my needs. I mean, I couldn't wipe my nose or scratch an itch or roll over in bed or do so many daily activities most people take for granted. I had no control over my bowels or my bladder, and my breathing was compromised. Everything just looked so hopeless.
What was going through your mind at that time when you have not accepted but you're living it? So what was going through your mind?
Well, I tried to imagine what my future could be like in this condition. And the doctors, the nurses, the therapists seemed reluctant to answer any of my questions. And finally, I was able to get hold of a pamphlet published by the rehab facility. They broke it down by the level you were hurt. I'm hurt between the fourth and fifth cervical. And with somebody turning the pages for me, because I couldn't, they described what type of movement I would have, where my level of sensation would be, and how it would affect my bodily functions, my bladder, my bowels, my breathing. And then they had a page, what type of careers I could eventually go into. And the only career I saw for my level of injury would be to someday sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. At this time, they didn't even have touch tone phones, only rotary phones. So I couldn't even dial a telephone or take notes or write anything. And I started to think maybe I won't even be able to do that. And here I was, 20 years old, studying industrial engineering at one of the most prestigious engineering colleges in the nation. And now I wasn't sure if I could even sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. I was devastated.
What was the moment when you decide to go back to Cornell University?
My family kept encouraging me that there was a lot I could still do, and that while I had a severe physical disability, it did not affect me intellectually at all. And I had a vocational counselor at the rehab center by the name of Joyce Mesh, and she encouraged me to go back to school. I mean, Joyce said that, I shouldn't let people treat me as if I'm an invalid because I'm not. And she said, just think about what that word means. It says invalid. And she convinced me, as well as my family, that I still had value, that my life still had meaning, and that there was a lot I could still do. And with that encouragement, I decided that I should go back to school. But I might add that many times the medical profession felt that I was just not accepting my injury because I kept trying to pick up my life exactly where it was at the time I got hurt. I tried to convince myself I was not going to let my injury prevent me from anything I did. But when I chose to go back to Cornell, it probably wasn't the wisest decision because Cornell is on a very hilly terrain. This was well before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect, and there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus. But I decided I'm going to just try and go forward the way I would have had I not been injured.
When you reach out to Cornell, they just said yes? Were they concerned?
Well, I met with the administration and they tried to help me. They didn't know the best way to help, but they really tried. I was grateful that they allowed me to come back. So, I drew up my schedule without fully realizing that on my first day of classes, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps just to attend. I couldn't use my electric wheelchair. I had to use a manual wheelchair where I was pushed everywhere. And my dorm room was in a building that had 10 steps just to get in. So I asked the administration, could they at least put in a ramp for my dorm so I wouldn't have to go up and down those 10 steps a few times each day? They originally said no, because they would have to remove 2 bushes, and they were concerned students might protest. After that first semester, we had a fire drill. And the next day, the administrators asked me how I managed. And I was very truthful when I told them my attendant bounced me down the 10 steps. I felt bad because I know I slowed up the other students who were exiting. Within 2 weeks, they put in the ramp, and it was clear that ramp was not for my benefit, but was to help the other students for their safety. But I still, at least now I had a ramp to use, and not one student complained about removing the 2 bushes.
Hmm.
That's how I got my first ramp.
What was it like that moment when you felt I may have lost a lot, but I can still build a life from here? What was that moment like?
Well, it was really a wonderful feeling. Here I was back at school with the rest of my classmates. I got to see my fraternity brothers again, my football teammates again, just being in class with other students rather than being surrounded by hospital staff. I mean, I went back to school just 9 days after I got out of the hospital. So after spending almost 10 months surrounded by doctors, nurses, and therapists, I was finally back in the environment that I liked, back in school with the rest of my classmates.
You actually changed direction when you went back to Cornell from engineering to legal studies. What made you choose legal studies and your purpose that you want to help others along the way? What was that?
Well, I went into engineering because I was very good in math. And my high school guidance counselor said, if you're good in math, you should be an engineer. And I found engineering really difficult. I had taken an elective in psychology while I was there. And my psychology professor, Dr. James Moss, and he took an interest in me. And he thought that a viable field for me would be to be a counselor or a psychologist, and that I could be in a helping profession where perhaps my experience could help others. So he encouraged me to pursue a career in psychology and counseling. So I still continued in engineering, and I earned my degree, my Bachelor of Science, where I majored in industrial engineering. And I must say, when I started my second master's degree, my advisor at Columbia took me aside and actually told me I'm still going to have a very difficult time finding a job if I'm ever able to one, even in that field, because despite what they teach, even people in the rehabilitation field would be reluctant or at least hesitant to hire somebody with my severe disability. It took me a year to find a job. I mailed out more than 200 resumes before I finally was given the opportunity to work at an organization on Long Island called Abilities Incorporated, now called the Viscardi Center, and they hired me to work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for other individuals with severe disabilities. And that changed my life. That was in 1977. I had been paralyzed for 6.5 years by then, and I'd received so much help from so many people. This was my first opportunity to give back that help. I finally was in a position where now I could help others as a counselor.
What did the service and purpose do for your own healing?
It did a lot. I mean, it increased my self confidence, my feelings of self esteem, my feelings of self worth, and it gave me a purpose again. Now I had people I was counseling looking up to me for guidance and encouragement. And it just made me feel so much better about myself and led me to believe there's still a lot I could do with my life to make a difference in other people's lives.
On that new path, what felt like the hardest hurdle? Was it more internal, more practical, or more about the world around you?
Well, it was a little bit of everything. First, you had to get to work. I had bought an accessible van that I was not able to drive. I needed a personal care attendant to drive me there. But once there, I didn't know how I'd be able to function in an office, what type of desk setup I would need, what kind of phone setup could I use. It was all really difficult to get used to. And it was a long day, 8-hour day for me. It was very difficult. And that took quite a while to get used to. But everybody at this facility really did their best to help me. And in that facility was set up for people in wheelchairs. So everything was architecturally designed to make it accessible for somebody like me. And that really changed my life.
Was there a season when you actually doubted yourself and you wanted to retreat back?
There were a lot of days like that, so many discouraging days. And when I saw how limited I was in the office, how difficult it was still for me to function, I had a phone set up where I had a phone hooked on to basically a Luxor lamp, the extension of that, where it would hold the receiver by my ear because I wasn't able to hold it. And somebody made a splint where I could actually dial the phone with a lot of difficulty, but I could do it. And it was a tremendous feeling each day to see there was still things I could do for myself without people assisting me. It made a huge difference.
Did it get easier asking for help?
I never felt good about asking for help, but I had to do it. And what made it even more difficult, before my injury, I always considered myself a bit of an introvert. I would sit in the very back of a large lecture, hope nobody would notice me, and try and blend in with the crowd. And
Mhm.
now I was in a position where I had to ask for help because there was so few activities I could do on my own. So I was forced to ask for help with everything I needed. And at the center, they actually had me doing a lot of public speaking, getting up in front of a lot of groups and organizations, giving talks. Initially, that was so uncomfortable and difficult for me to do. But eventually, I got more used to it, and they had me do quite a bit of it.
Mm. It's a remarkable journey. going through the everyday is a long process, and the courage that you have is peppered with fear, I imagine.
Thank you. Well, it was very difficult with each new step, but what helped a lot was I was working at the Viscardi Center, where people were more attuned to helping people with disabilities. After a while there, they had me speak before so many groups and organizations. And at the end of my talks, I would often be asked questions. And I guess it wasn't long before I started to think, there's no reason why I couldn't become that lawyer. So I left the center and I went to Hofstra University School of Law. My brother encouraged me to do an internship at the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. And at the end of law school, I applied for a full-time job, and I was fortunate the district attorney at the time, a person by the name of Dennis Dillon, placed his hiring decisions on my abilities rather than my disability. So he hired me to work as an assistant district attorney. And I went to court my first day, and I couldn't fit through the swinging doorways in the courtroom. They were too narrow for me to get through in my electric wheelchair. It's like I couldn't believe after all I had done, I couldn't even get into the courtroom. That's how I started my job.
Then what happened? Don't
Well,
stop there.
Well, eventually they had to take off the hinging doorways and the screws, and bolts to make it a little wider. Eventually they widened each of the courtrooms, but I know people still had questions about whether I could function as an assistant DA. I know one of the supervisors that was involved in training me confided to another assistant. I don't know how they could have hired him. He can't even write. I was promoted a number of times in my job, and I eventually became a deputy bureau chief, where I was actually in a position where I was now helping supervise more than 25 other assistant district attorneys. And I worked at the district attorney's office more than 33 years full time, and then another 8 years part time when I decided to retire. So, all told, more than 40 years as an assistant district attorney.
Imagine in the past where computers and laptops were kind of non in existence. How did you go through the studies and going through the exams, writing the answers? Who does that for you?
I needed people to help me, whether it be turning pages.
Did they give you extra time?
When I took the bar exam, they allowed me to start before the other test takers, but I had to finish at the same time. Now, the other test takers were starting at 9, and it took me more than 2 hours just to get up in the morning, to get dressed, to get bathed, and brought to the facility. So I had to get up before 6 in the morning to get there by 8 in the morning to get what was close to an extra hour for the 2 days bar exam. Dictating my answers to, they assigned somebody to do the writing, always took longer. Much of the exam was multiple choice. And I'd say, okay, the answer to number one is B. And the writer would say, is that B or C? And I'd have to go, B as in boy.
Were you frustrated?
Very. Very, but I didn't know what else I could do. I had no plan B. I mean, I had to find a way to make this work. And fortunately, through a lot of help from family and friends, I got to the place where I was.
Later on, you go on to meeting your life partner and becoming a father. Was there any courage that you need to build up to believe that you're going to do this?
Oh, that's the best part of my life. And, it was really difficult. I remember the first time I asked a girl out on a date. It was a girl that was working as an intern at the rehab facility. I was still newly injured. And I asked her if she'd like to go to a movie with me. And she excitedly said yes. And immediately I said, oh my God, what did I do? But she was enthusiastic and willingly did it. But, as time went on, how do I, start dating and dating when I got out of college? Now things were getting more serious. And eventually I met my life partner, who I originally met because she was working as one of my personal care aides. She was my weekend aide. After I met her, we, developed a personal relationship. where we seemed to get closer and closer as friends. And eventually it turned into a romantic relationship. But even then, I couldn't foresee it ever being a permanent relationship. I even told her I don't expect to ever have a permanent relationship. And my Aunt Betty encouraged me not to feel that way, that I should remain open to a permanent relationship, that if the woman knows exactly what my condition is, I shouldn't limit that. And, eventually it was actually my, eight at the time, Anna, my partner, who proposed to me. I didn't even have the courage to propose. She proposed to me.
Oh,
And
she's beautiful.
yeah, I fortunately had the good sense to say yes. Um, and we decided to get married. And when we were talking about getting married, Anna told me that she wanted to have my baby. Now, this really seemed impossible. At the
Mm.
time, I had been paralyzed for more than 30 years, and I was already in my 50s.
Oh,
But we decided we would look into various options, including in vitro fertilization. And we're very excited to learn it still might be possible for someone in my condition to father a child. So we pursued in vitro, and through what I would call the miracle of science, Anna became pregnant. And Catherine, on January 24th, 2005, I was present in the delivery room. Think about this, picture this. I was present in the delivery room when my wife Anna gave birth to triplets. We have three incredible, beautiful sons, Joey, Jimmy, and Timmy. They're now 21 years old. They're all juniors at three separate colleges in upstate New York, and I couldn't be happier or more proud.
what do you think fatherhood healed in you or revealed in you?
Well, it opened up a whole new life for me. I couldn't believe how much you could actually love a person until I saw my three sons. And it's just overwhelming. And now my three children, and I'm doing my best to help them grow up with the proper values and character that I feel is important in a good person. And they've done that. They are incredible individuals, each one of them. There's nothing I like better than to spend time with my kids. It is just the most wonderful thing in the world to spend any time I can with them and try and help them develop and answer any questions they have. And it's a two-way street.
So often, when we're in a difficult situation, we naturally look outward for help and support, and that matters deeply. But nothing can really change unless the I within us is willing to take that path. So, in this next part of our conversation, I would like to explore your inner world and the mindset shifts that really helped you move mountains and live the life that so many can't imagine.
Catherine,
Um,
I received so much help. It got to the point where I felt I'd be letting everybody else down if I didn't do everything I could do to make a success out of my life. I would feel guilty if I didn't work so hard to do that after I knew everybody had worked so hard to give me all the help, encouragement, and attention that I needed. And that also became a catalyst for me to do what I was able to do.
so, the deep gratitude that you feel move you through.
Absolutely. And I brought my children to the Viscardi Center to make sure that they had the mindset that it was important for them to not only recognize challenges everybody faces, but for them to try and help in any way they can to help other people who needed assistance.
It's amazing. Along your path, did you meet some people who try to persuade you otherwise for your own good? Do you?
All the time. I had so many naysayers to tell me you can't do something or it's just too difficult. And, as I said early on, it was like the medical profession felt I was just not accepting my disability because I kept trying to do more things. And, I eventually wrote a book about my life and I called it I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken Story. because I kept trying to do things that people hadn't done in the past that had my type of disability. And I might add that the place where I got that title from was 6 months after my injury. I was asked to testify before a United States Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And the words on that inscription have always been so meaningful to me. The inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream of things that never were and say, why not?" And that's how I tried to lead my life. I dream of things that never were and say, why not?
So you navigate through the naysayers by just having the gratitude in your heart from all the support that you have.
Absolutely. It really changed my life in so many ways.
Now, your story carries so much courage, but I imagine courage doesn't mean the absence of doubt. So when you are facing a new chapter, what is the inner conversation you typically have with yourself? And how do you gently move through the fear or discouragement in those moments?
You know, people have always tried to place limitations on me ever since my injury.
Mm.
And I had to constantly show them and myself, convince myself, there's nothing I can't do if I set my mind to it and work hard. And it reminds me of a cartoon caption I saw many years ago. It showed a pussy cat looking in the mirror and seeing in his reflection a lion looking back at him. And that's how I try to feel about myself. Anything I set my mind to, and not to listen to the naysayers, not to listen to the people who tell me something is just too difficult, or that you can't do something. And I'm not sure I always made the wisest decisions. I mean, going back to an inaccessible campus like Cornell may have not been the wisest decision, but I would always do my best to make the decision, the right decision, once I made it. And that's how I've tried to live my life.
In the 17th, was there the concept of counselors, mentors, mental health support that you have constant access to help you go through the seasons of lives? Or how was it like in the 70s?
Well, again, things were very limited. This was well before the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you didn't see many people with my type of injury, my type of disability out in public, because most facilities were not wheelchair accessible. So most people were not encouraging me to do things like I was doing. But my family and friends were encouraging me. They believed there was still a lot I could do, even though
Mm.
other people were not doing it. And with their help and encouragement, I decided I still wanted to do a lot with my life and not to listen to the naysayers. And the help and encouragement I received from my family, who kept encouraging me, they kept feeling I could do anything I set my mind to. And they helped convince me that I could do it.
So blessed with them.
I was very fortunate.
When something life changing becomes, our everyday reality, support and kindness can still be there, but more so, the norm is the quieter moments where you are just yourself going through the motion of every day. How do you strengthen your resolute in those moments?
Well, now I have a reason to push myself to do as much as I could possibly do because I have a wife and children, and I would never want to let them down. And I want them to feel that if I could do it, they could do it, that there's nothing they can't do. It helps me feel better about myself, that I'm making a difference in other people's lives as well.
Were there times that you were tired of always pushing yourself?
Many many times, but I'd lie back, look at the ceiling, and say, I have no plan B. What else am I going to do? I will not be satisfied just sitting back at home watching television and not doing anything with my life. I will not feel good about myself if I did that. And in order for me to feel better, I needed to feel that I was constantly moving forward with my life.
Looking back on your journey, is there anything you wish you had done differently?
As I indicated, I don't know if I always made the right decision, but I worked hard to make it the right decision once I made it. No, I don't think there's anything I would do differently. I feel very fortunate that I have an incredible wife, wonderful, wonderful children, and that I'm proud of the way I live my life. It means that there's nothing I can't do if I set my mind to it. And while it may not have been done before, doesn't mean I cannot do it now. So I believe there are a lot of options and possibilities open to me as well as to others if we simply pursue them with the right attitude.
What is the one thing that you will tell somebody who just met a life-changing experience how to move forward? What would you tell them now?
Not to give up, that we all have bad days. We all have days that may seem overwhelming at the time, but tomorrow's another day. There's an awful lot everybody can still do, despite whatever adversity that's facing them at the moment, to not to lose hope, not to listen to naysayers, and to believe in themselves.
Thank you so much, Ken, for being here today. First of all, I'm really privileged when Anna reached out to me. I felt, oh my God, I'm so privileged. I always know that, the difference between a full life versus a limited one, it's all in our mind. But when I read your story, I go, this is pure magic. It's more than evidence. It's a miracle. And you're so awesome.
Thank you, Catherine. I really appreciate that. And I just have to reiterate, I couldn't have done any of it on my own. I had a lot of help every step of the way. And if we all work together, there's a lot we all could do in helping others, making everyone's life better, including our own.
So true. Thank you so much, Ken, for coming here today and sharing with our listeners.
Thank you for having me as your guest and giving me the opportunity to share my story with your listeners.